As dawn broke over Strasbourg on a sultry July morning in 1518, the city was already restless with the hum of daily life. The timber-framed facades of houses along the Ill River caught the first gold of the sun, their shutters thrown open to catch a rare breeze. Market women in linen kirtles, hair covered by caps, knelt by the fountains, scrubbing vegetables and fish as they traded gossip in the Alsatian dialect. Apprentices hurried across the cobblestones with baskets of bread, their tunics stained with flour, while a group of barefoot children darted between them, their laughter echoing against the city walls. In the shadow of Strasbourg's great cathedral, the spire rising impossibly high above the jumbled rooftops, monks filed toward morning prayers, their sandals slapping quietly on worn flagstones. The city was a patchwork of faith, commerce, and tradition, its people bound by the rhythms of church bells and the measured toil of summer work. That morning, the heat pressed low, yet people lingered in the alleys and lanes, exchanging news of a poor harvest and rumors of strange portents in the sky. Housewives hung damp laundry from wooden poles, the fabric fluttering as a slight wind swept off the river, carrying with it the tang of tanners' vats and the sweet scent of crushed herbs from the apothecary. Horses clopped past, drawing carts laden with beer barrels from the local breweries, their drivers swatting flies and calling greetings to neighbors. In the marketplace, a physician in a long robe and felt hat negotiated for medicinal spices, his leather satchel bulging with dried roots and mysterious powders. The city's guildsmen, shoemakers, coopers, bakers, gathered under the arcades, their hands rough from labor, listening as a herald read new edicts from the city council in a voice that barely rose above the murmur of the crowd. Children's rhymes drifted on the air, mingling with the clang of a distant blacksmith. Life in Strasbourg moved forward, purposeful, orderly, and familiar, each citizen navigating the day's tasks with a sense of routine earned by centuries of communal living. Yet beneath the surface, a tension simmered, the apprehension bred by hunger, the ever-present fear of illness, the weight of superstition. Still, on this morning, there was little to suggest that anything extraordinary was about to begin, just the ordinary choreography of human life, poised on the brink of the unknown. As midsummer's humidity descended upon Strasbourg in 1518, a palpable tension seemed to settle across the city's winding alleys and half-timbered houses. The city's square, normally a place of bustling commerce and neighborly exchange, had become a crucible of rumors and anxious glances. The river Ill moved sluggishly beneath its stone bridges, carrying away whispers between the tightly packed dwellings and the looming city walls. Inside the cathedral, candles flickered along the nave, illuminating the faces of townsfolk who knelt, some fervently praying for relief from hunger, others for protection against the fevers and unseen evils that stalked from home to home. The summer's grain stores, carefully monitored by city officials, had begun to dwindle, and the guilds of bakers and butchers convened in hushed, urgent meetings to discuss the rationing of bread and meat. Bakers, their fingers dusted with flour, peered from their shop fronts, watching patrons haggle ever more desperately for a few more loaves. In the taverns, where the scent of sour ale clung to the walls, men argued about the rising taxes and the city council's latest decrees, while outside, street performers drew ever smaller crowds, their laughter strained in the muggy air. At the gates, guards eyed farmers and merchants from the hinterlands with suspicion, searching for signs of sickness or ill fortune before allowing them entry. In the cramped dwellings, mothers soothed restless children, their cheeks sallow from too little to eat, while fathers tallied their remaining coins by guttering lamplight. Physicians, their robes heavy with the scent of vinegar, and their faces marked by sleepless nights, shuffled between homes, proffering advice, avoidance of bad air, reliance on herbal concoctions, though few could afford their remedies. Talk of divine punishment mingled with complaints about city magistrates, the lines between spiritual and earthly suffering blurring as the summer wore on. Across the city, bells tolled not only for the dead, but as reminders of curfews and the need to conserve resources, each chime ringing with a warning that Strasbourg was locked in the grip of forces neither its council nor its clergy could fully command. In this charged atmosphere, every cough or stumble on the street drew wary looks, and behind closed doors, the city's people braced themselves for calamity, as pressure built invisibly, but inexorably, day by sweltering day. Inside the timbered homes of Strasbourg, where daylight filtered through small leaded windows and the scent of hearth smoke clung to rough woolen cloaks, unease had settled as surely as dust on the flagstones. In these cramped, candlelit rooms, families whispered together, hands wringing as the muffled thud of feet echoed from the street outside. The mother, Annette, pressed a damp rag to her daughter's forehead, eyes darting toward the door with every burst of laughter or weeping that drifted up from below. Her husband, Mathis, had barred the door, sliding the iron bolt home, while their youngest crouched in the corner, fingering the edge of his linen tunic and asking when the music would stop. Through the thin walls, the relentless shuffle and stomp were impossible to ignore. Neighbors' once faces glimpsed only at the market or cathedral now seemed possessed by some invisible conductor, their boots scuffing the cobblestones in ceaseless patterns. Along the narrow alleys, families peered from behind shutters as women in petticoats and men in frayed hose lurched past, faces flushed, lips murmuring snatches of tune or prayer. Inside the guild halls, city elders met beneath vaulted ceilings strung with faded banners, arguing in anxious whispers as they dispatched runners to fetch the physician Paracelsus and his learned peers. The feverish dancers sometimes collapsed in the doorways of strangers' homes, their bodies shuddering in spasms. Householders, fearful of contagion, dragged the afflicted away with broom handles or doused them with buckets of well water. In kitchens, cooks set aside their trenchers, flinching at the sudden crash of a neighbor tumbling against the wall. Candles burned lower each night, illuminating faces gaunt with worry, hands trembling over wooden rosaries, while the city's heartbeat thudded on in the streets. Through chinks in the stonework, the dancers' feet wore grooves into the paving, a testimony written not in parchment, but in the very bones of Strasbourg's lanes. Families sealed themselves in, latching shutters and tightening window gaps with rags, praying for the frenzied pounding outside to fade. Yet each morning, the dancing resumed, the sound of heels on stone, accompanied by the gasps and groans of bodies at their limit, echoing through the walls and into the uneasy silence within every home. Late July sun pressed down upon Strasbourg as the cobblestones of the city's narrow lanes grew thick with the muffled thump of human feet. By now, the spectacle of Frau Troffea's lone, inexplicable jig had metastasized into a convulsive tide. Dozens, then scores, and soon some 300 or 400 bodies were commandeered by the same compulsion. Onlookers gathered at safer move, peering from beneath peaked hoods and behind the carved lintels of half-timbered houses, their faces drawn with dread and awe. The afflicted, mostly women but also men and even children, swayed and stamped without pause, their linen garments clinging to sweat-soaked skin, faces contorted with fatigue, desperation, or vacant surrender. In the shadow of the Cathedral of Our Lady, where the bells tolled for vespers, some dancers collapsed in heaps, limbs twitching, only to be carried away by neighbors or city guards, their shoes worn through to bare, blistered heels. The city council, grasping for answers, dispatched physicians who dismissed supernatural explanations, declaring instead that it was hot blood, a fever of the humors, best cured by more dancing. They hired musicians and erected a wooden platform in the grain market, adjacent to the River Ill, thinking controlled music might purge the malady. The pipers and drummers arrived, their somber melodies threading through the air as afflicted citizens clutched each other's hands or spun alone in wild, clumsy arcs. Yet with every drumbeat, more joined, the compulsion seemed to feed on itself, each exhausted body fueling the next. Beyond the music and stomping, the city's normal rhythms unraveled. Bakers watched their loaves burn in ovens as their apprentices dashed off to the squares. Smiths left anvils cold, Mothers abandoned their market stalls to search for vanished children. The dancers' feet left dark stains on the paving stones, trailing blood and sweat toward the riverbanks. Priests knelt in the cathedral, whispering prayers for deliverance, while in the city council chambers, the magistrates' wax seals dripped in the heat as they drafted new edicts and appeals to the bishop. The city, wrapped in the fever of movement, had reached an edge. Already, the first deaths were being whispered about, hearts giving out, legs swelling with infection. Yet the music played on, and the crowd churned, the turning point marked not by any official decree, but by the sheer momentum of bodies that would not halt. In the centuries that followed the feverish summer of 1518, the narrow cobbled streets and half-timbered homes of Strasbourg continued to whisper the strange legacy of the city's dancing plague. Local chroniclers and ecclesiastical scribes, their ink-stained fingers trembling over parchment, documented the madness with a mixture of awe and disquiet, carefully copying the accounts into the city's annals. Some townsfolk, especially in the decades immediately after, passed on stories of their own ancestors collapsing on the hot flagstones of the market square, their shoes worn thin by the relentless stamping of feet. The memory of Frau Trophia, the earliest known dancer, and the dozens who joined her, was recounted in hushed voices on summer nights, the details shifting with each retelling. How the church bells tolled as priests led barefoot processions to shrines, offering prayers to Saint Vitus, and how the river Ill shimmered with the torchlight of concerned townsfolk watching the spectacle unfold from the safety of its banks. In the years that followed, city officials kept meticulous records of unusual gatherings, ever wary of signs that the madness might return, while street performers and musicians sometimes referenced the event in subtle ways, a wild burst of rhythm on a lute, or a sudden frenzied reel during a midsummer fair, met with nervous laughter from those old enough to recall the stories. The physical traces of the event faded slowly. For a generation, the steps where the dancers collapsed were cleaned with extra care, and the chapel of St. Vitus, where many were taken in desperate hope of a cure, saw more pilgrims than ever before, its stone threshold worn smooth by the passage of anxious feet. The event lingered too in the artwork of the region. Woodcuts and illuminated manuscripts sometimes depicted figures in contorted, ecstatic postures, surrounded by bewildered onlookers and the ever-present towers of Strasbourg's cathedral. These images became symbols not just of the inexplicable calamity, but of human vulnerability in the face of forces beyond understanding. Even as the century turned and memories grew more distant, families preserved tokens, perhaps a rosary clasped by a dancer's hand or a letter from a priest describing the ordeal, passed down as somber reminders of a time when music, faith, and fear converged in the city's heart. Through these palpable relics, the dancing plague's echoes threaded themselves into the fabric of Strasbourg's identity, shaping the stories its people told about endurance, mystery, and the unpredictable currents of collective life.